At 2,000 frames per second, the camera caught something the human eye was never meant to see. A metallic blur tore across the mesa, half a mile in just over 1 second, before disappearing without a sound. Within moments, the air around Skinwalker Ranch began to vibrate, like the ground itself was alive. What Travis Taylor's team uncovered that night forced them to shut down the experiment, abandon the site, and question whether they had just made contact or opened something that was never meant to be opened. Make sure you subscribe, because tonight we're breaking down the terrifying discovery that made the Skinwalker team run for their lives. It started the way these nights always pretend to start: routine, clinical, harmless. High-speed camera specialist Burdett Anderson rolled back onto Skinwalker Ranch with a flight case full of gear that eats light for breakfast. Rigs capable of 2,000 frames per second, shutters sharp enough to catch a blink halfway closed. Every time Anderson shows up, the ranch seems to answer, and everyone on the team felt it. The subtle lift in the air like static before a storm. Dr. Travis S. Taylor walked the east field with him, tracing the invisible lines where compasses spin, drones drop, and cattle refuse to graze. The plan sounded simple on paper: synchronize rockets, tone generators, and high-speed optics. Then let physics do the talking. Out here, physics doesn't talk. It whispers, and sometimes it lies. They laid the grid like a surgeon preps a table. Cables snaked across frost-stiff grass, tripods locked, telemetry linked to the command trailer. The cattle formed a nervous crescent at the fence line, watching as if they knew the script better than the scientist. First pass, baseline measurement, clean. Second pass, micro-anomalies jittering at the edges of the spectrum. Nothing you could swear to in court. Everything you'd remember in a nightmare. Anderson framed the mesa, field of view across the whole ridge, he murmured, then checked time code against the rocket ignition cue. The countdown cut through the cold. Fire, smoke, a needle of light stitching the sky. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then every monitor hiccuped just once, like the ranch had taken a breath. On playback, the room fell silent. A metallic smear crossed the frame. No contrail, no shock collar, no thermal bloom, just a shape that traversed half a mile in a touch over 1 second and vanished clean. No thunder, no air ripped to shreds, just gone. Travis didn't cheer. He rewound. He measured. He watched the cattle surge as the object passed, not away from it, but after it, like they were pulled by something the human eye missed. "If this is noise," he said finally, "it's the smartest noise I've ever met." The baseline was broken. Curiosity was no longer academic. And somewhere beneath that sandstone mesa, the night pressed a finger to the ranch's pulse, and the pulse pressed back. By morning, the command trailer was quiet, except for the soft whine of hard drives spinning. The team replayed the footage frame by frame, eyes glued to the massive monitors glowing in the dark. The object had appeared for only 6 frames, barely a fraction of a second, but each one defied everything they knew about motion, heat, and light. It wasn't just fast, it was impossible. Calculations confirmed what Anderson had whispered the night before. The object crossed half a mile in just over a second, clocking speeds near 3,600 miles per hour without sound, propulsion, or air disruption. No sonic boom, no heat distortion, no signature of any known craft. Travis Taylor stood behind the monitors, arms folded, silent. His mind flashed back to the 2004 Navy Tic Tac incident, another object that bent the laws of physics and left trained pilots speechless. But what disturbed him most wasn't just the similarity, it was the reaction time. The UFO had appeared precisely 6 seconds after the rocket launch, not before, not during, after. "It's responding," he muttered. "It's waiting for us." They ran the footage through spectrographic filters. No chemical trails, no reflective surfaces. The anomaly absorbed light, leaving a hole where color should have been. "It's frictionless," Eric Bard noted quietly. "Whatever that thing is, it's moving through space without touching it." The phrase sent chills through the team. Outside, the Geiger counters ticked higher. The electromagnetic sensors near the mesa pulsed in the same rhythm as the rocket telemetry. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. The pattern had returned. Travis leaned over the console, jaw tight. "That's the same signal we picked up during last year's anomaly." The air around the trailer grew heavy, like static before a lightning strike. For the first time, they weren't just observing the phenomenon was observing them. Something above or beneath the mesa had recognized their presence and was now playing by its own rules. And Travis knew that once you get its attention, Skinwalker Ranch doesn't stop watching. By dusk, the team's curiosity had boiled into determination. They weren't content just to analyze the footage. They wanted to provoke a reaction. If the anomaly had responded to the rocket, what else could make it appear? Dr. Travis Taylor proposed pairing another launch with a range of tonal frequencies, broadcasting specific sound waves into the atmosphere to test for interaction. If this thing is intelligent, he said, we'll see it adapt. It wasn't arrogance, it was obsession. Out here, you learn that every answer drags 10 new questions behind it. Burdett Anderson set up his high-speed cameras again, each one pointed directly toward the mesa. Their lenses shimmered under the moonlight, catching the faint red glow of the recording indicators. The crew checked signal integrity, frequency generators, and launch synchronization one last time. Then, standing amid the hum of machinery and desert silence, they began the countdown. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The rockets screamed skyward, leaving glowing trails across the Utah night. Seconds later, Eric Bard initiated the sound sweep. Tones so deep they made the air feel thick, vibrating through bone. The frequencies rippled out across the mesa, bending into the canyon beyond. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, the static returned. Every monitor in the command trailer flickered at once. The spectrum analyzer showed sharp peaks at random intervals. Anderson's voice cracked through the comms. We've got movement, east field, 400 feet above ground level. The team rushed to the screens. There, on infrared, a faint orb shimmered, then solidified into a defined shape, metallic and smooth. It appeared only for a heartbeat, slicing across the frame at impossible speed before vanishing behind the mesa. But that was all it took. The cameras, sensors, and recording devices had captured it again. Another object, same trajectory, same speed, same reaction to their test. It's responding to sound, Travis whispered. We're calling it, and it's calling back. A heavy silence followed. Outside, the cattle bellowed as the ground trembled softly beneath their feet. For the first time, the team realized the ranch wasn't a location they were studying. It was an organism studying them back. The night after the second sighting, the air around the ranch hung unnaturally still. The usual desert wind had died, leaving behind a silence so deep it pressed against the eardrums. Every sensor was calibrated, every instrument armed. They wanted to repeat the phenomenon, prove it wasn't coincidence. At exactly 9:03 p.m., Eric Bard powered up the tone generator again, cycling through a sweep of frequencies that climbed higher and higher. Within seconds, the hum became physical, a low vibration crawling up their legs and into their chests. At first, the vibration was faint, like the earth was exhaling. But then, something changed. The ground under the east field began pulsing rhythmically. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats. The same coded pattern they'd captured on the electromagnetic spectrum now rippled through the dirt itself. Kill the tone, Travis ordered. Eric cut the generator, yet the vibrations didn't stop. Monitors flashed red as seismographs spiked across every channel. The team scrambled to check their equipment, but everything was operating normally. The tremors weren't mechanical, they were environmental. It's echoing back at us, Eric whispered. The ground's responding. Travis felt his pulse sync with the rhythm. He didn't like it. Outside, the animals were losing their minds. The cattle bellowed and ran in circles. Birds scattered from the trees as dogs howled toward the mesa. Then, without warning, the temperature dropped 10 degrees in under a minute. Breath fogged in the air. Radiation sensors ticked upward. The hum deepened, no longer just vibration, but resonance. It wasn't sound anymore. It was presence. Anderson's cameras picked it up first, a faint distortion in the darkness above the mesa, like rippling heat waves bending the starlight. As they watched, the shimmer expanded outward, forming a translucent dome across the east field before collapsing back into itself. When it vanished, so did the tremors. Silence. The monitors stilled, and the readings leveled out as though nothing had happened. But everyone in that trailer felt it, that electric wrongness that doesn't fade when the data ends. Travis looked out into the dark and said, "We didn't start a reaction. We woke one up." The following morning, Exhaustion hung over the team like a fog. Coffee cups, radiation charts, and still frames littered the control room. No one spoke much. The memory of the ground moving under their boots was still too fresh. As they reviewed the data, local historian Thomas Winterton entered quietly with a handful of old records, maps, tribal accounts, and journals collected from the nearby Ute reservation. "You should hear this," he said. He explained that long before settlers arrived, the Ute people had forbidden this land. They called it a gateway, guarded by what they described as beings of smoke and shadow. In some of the oldest stories, the medicine men spoke of sound gates, tones and chants that could open invisible doors across the mesa. Frequencies weren't technology to them, they were ritual. Those who misused them, the elders said, vanished into the light. As Thomas read, Eric compared the numbers. "Our frequency sweep last night peaked at exactly 192 hertz. Thomas paused, then showed him a line from an 1800s translation of a Ute song. The tone that summons watchers from the sky. The documented pitch, roughly 190 hertz. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. Had they replicated a frequency not heard on this land for centuries? Travis rubbed his temples. So what we thought was science might be something older than science. That night, they ran the footage again. As the 192 hertz tone played back through the speakers, the same glow appeared, an orb hovering just above the mesa, pulsing softly in time with the frequency. It didn't dart like the craft before. It listened. "I think it's waiting for something," Anderson said. Travis stared at the screen, or someone. Outside, thunder rolled in from the west, though the weather radar showed clear skies. For a brief moment, the orb on screen flickered brighter, almost human in shape, then vanished, leaving a faint echo of the frequency still buzzing through the speakers. Thomas's words rang in Travis's mind long after. "Sound opens the gates, but not all that comes through will leave." By the third night, even the veterans on the team were uneasy. Every instrument on the ranch was acting strangely. Batteries drained faster than normal, compasses spun erratically, and drones lost GPS the moment they flew over the mesa. Still, Travis Taylor refused to stop. "If we walk away now," he said, "we'll never know what's inside that signal." He ordered a final test, a synchronized launch of rockets, timed with a full-range sweep of tonal frequencies, stretching from subsonic rumbles to piercing ultrasonic tones. If something was responding to them, this would provoke it. The crew assembled in the east field under a colorless moon. The desert felt wrong, still, tense, like the earth was holding its breath. Anderson set up the 2,000 frames per second cameras, while Eric fine-tuned the tone generator. "We'll push through every band, one after another," he said. "If something's waiting, it'll show itself." Travis gave the nod. 3, 2, 1. Launch! The rockets tore upward in a blaze of light, vanishing into the black. The sound generator kicked in, the frequencies crawling up through the air like invisible fingers. Seconds later, every monitor flashed white. "Contact!" Eric shouted. On thermal view, a massive object shimmered above the mesa, oval, rotating, faintly translucent. The team watched in stunned silence as it drifted across the horizon. Then, the laser tracking system glitched. "The beams are bending," Anderson said. The live feed showed the targeting lasers curving upward, defying every law of optics. The object pulsed 3 times, paused, then 3 more, mimicking the code they'd seen all week. "It's signaling," Travis whispered. A blinding flash followed, and the power cut instantly. For 20 full seconds, they sat in darkness. The only sound, the distant howling of coyotes and the ticking of cooling metal. When the lights flickered back on, the object was gone. But the radiation detectors had recorded a spike, short, intense, and concentrated directly over the mesa. Travis exhaled, barely audible. "We didn't see into the sky tonight," he said. "The sky opened and looked back at us." The following day, the ranch was silent. No wind, no birds, not even the buzz of insects. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. The crew gathered in the command trailer, reviewing what little data survived the blackout. But the deeper they dug, the stranger it got. Files corrupted mid-transfer. Cameras had recorded when no one pressed record. One frame, frozen in static, showed tall shapes, thin, towering figures standing on the mesa ridge, half obscured by the haze. For a full minute, no one spoke. Travis Taylor zoomed in slowly, pulse quickening. "Those aren't artifacts," he muttered. "That's depth, that's real distance." But before they could analyze further, the power flickered again. A low, pulsing hum filled the room, the same rhythm they'd been hearing for weeks. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. Eric grabbed the radiation monitor. The readings were climbing fast. "We're in a spike again," he warned. Then one of the crew, Anderson's assistant, collapsed, clutching his ears and screaming, "Make it stop! It's in my head!" The hum had somehow bypassed the equipment and was resonating through the human body itself. Travis knelt beside him, shouting for the generator to shut down, but it was already off. The tone wasn't coming from any machine. It was coming from the environment. The entire trailer began to vibrate in sync with the pulse. Drinks rattled, cameras shook, and then, as suddenly as it began, everything went still. The assistant was conscious, but trembling, his pupils dilated. When asked what he heard, he said a single word: "Observe." The word sent a chill through everyone present. It was the same one the sound engineers had isolated from the distorted footage days earlier. They were being watched, not metaphorically, not in theory, but directly. Something intelligent was echoing their own experiments back at them, as if learning their behavior, adapting to their methods. Travis stood slowly, his expression unreadable. "We're done for the night," he said. "Whatever this is, it's not waiting for us anymore. It's inside the ranch now." By sunrise, every person on the ranch knew something was wrong. The atmosphere felt charged, the sky a dull metallic gray, even though the forecast promised clear blue. The tone, the pulse that haunted their data, hadn't stopped overnight. It was faint, buried under the wind, but every few seconds the ground gave a subtle shudder, like a heartbeat deep beneath the soil. Nobody was sleeping. Nobody was eating. Travis Taylor gathered the team in the command trailer, his face drawn and pale. "We're standing on something that's alive," he said quietly, "and it knows we're still here." While they debated one last scan before leaving, the monitors began to flicker. The seismic sensors lit up across the entire east field. The tremors weren't random. They were forming a pattern. Eric Bard leaned over the display. "3, pause, 3, he said, voice shaking. "It's communicating again." The moment he finished, the main trailer lights dimmed, and a deep, resonant vibration rattled every metal surface. Outside, the dogs began barking, and the cattle stampeded toward the fence line. Anderson sprinted to his cameras, shouting that the lenses were picking up heat signatures above the mesa. Through the thermal scopes, glowing orbs flickered across the horizon, 3 in a perfect line, pulsing in unison. Then, as they watched, a 4th appeared directly above them. "We need to shut it down!" Travis yelled. But before anyone could move, the radiation alarms screamed, red lights flashing across the control panel. The vibration grew stronger, humming through the floor until their teeth ached. Every monitor froze. For a split second, the live feed showed the mesa covered in a faint orange light, like molten metal shifting beneath the rock. Then everything went black. When power returned moments later, every system had reset. The footage was gone. The only file left on the drives was a single corrupted frame, the mesa glowing, the 4 orbs aligned above it, and the same chilling text written across the static. "Leave now?" Travis didn't argue. He ordered a full evacuation. As the team sped down the dirt road, seismic sensors on their laptops still pulsed behind them. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, like a warning or a promise. When the team finally cleared the property line, no one spoke for miles. The dust kicked up behind their trucks, hung like a veil between them and whatever they had just awakened. It was only once they reached the highway that Travis Taylor finally pulled over. The instruments in his truck were still chirping, soft, rhythmic spikes in radiation every few seconds. 3 pulses, a pause, 3 pulses. The signal had followed them. Over the next few days, the aftermath grew stranger. The hard drives recovered from the command trailer were mostly blank, overwritten by white noise. But buried inside the static, Anderson found something he couldn't explain. At precisely 2:11 a.m., the same moment the evacuation began, A new file had appeared on every device simultaneously. No one had created it. It contained a single frame of video, a faint sphere hovering above the mesa, glowing in bursts of orange and white, surrounded by what looked like geometric runes carved into the air itself. The file's metadata listed its origin as unknown system. Meanwhile, the ranch refused to settle. Local ranchers reported seeing silent lights drifting over the valley that week. Residents in nearby Roosevelt claimed to hear a low, mechanical hum vibrating through their homes at night. One even described her cattle refusing to enter the pasture, as if they sensed the echo of something buried deep beneath them. Back in Utah, Travis gave a private debriefing to Brandon Fugel. He looked exhausted, hollowed out by sleepless nights. "We didn't trigger a reaction," he said. "We proved there's intelligence behind it. It's using us to communicate. With who? I don't know." He paused before adding, "But whatever's under that mesa, it isn't done." A month later, Travis went silent. The production team received an encrypted voicemail from him, his voice low and shaking. "It's in the data. It's learning. Don't come back here." To this day, the government has classified every electromagnetic log recorded that night. The 1.6 gigahertz signal, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, continues to broadcast from the coordinates of the East Field. No one knows its source. No one dares investigate. But sometimes, when the wind dies and the valley falls silent, the ground still hums, like the ranch is remembering the moment it was disturbed, and every few months, the same pulse returns, echoing through the soil. A warning, or perhaps an invitation.
Brandon Fugel has spent millions of dollars and years of his life trying to understand what is happening beneath Skinwalker Ranch. He has brought in physicists, aerospace engineers, government-connected scientists, and some of the most sophisticated detection equipment ever deployed at a private research site. He has watched his team get hurt, watched equipment fail without explanation, and watched the mesa resist every attempt to penetrate its secrets. But what the scientific team detected beneath the mesa during the most recent phase of investigation was something that none of their frameworks had prepared them for, something that moved, something that responded, something alive. And when Brandon Fugel saw the data, he shut it all down. If you are new here, subscribe now, because what is living beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch changes everything the scientific team thought they were dealing with. To understand why the detection of life beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch produced a response serious enough to shut down the entire operation, you first have to understand what the mesa is within the context of the ranch and why, across every phase of investigation the property has undergone, from the earliest NIDS research through the current Fugel-era scientific program, the mesa has always occupied a position at the absolute center of whatever is happening on that land. The mesa is not simply an elevated geological feature on the Skinwalker Ranch property. It is the focal point around which the most significant and the most inexplicable phenomena documented at the ranch have consistently organized themselves across decades of investigation by multiple independent research teams. The Sherman family, who owned the ranch during the period that first brought it to national attention, documented their most extreme and most disturbing experiences in proximity to the mesa. The NADS team that investigated the property in the late 1990s and early 2000s identified the mesa as the location producing the highest concentration of anomalous phenomena and dedicated significant investigative resources to understanding what was generating those phenomena without arriving at a satisfactory explanation. Every subsequent investigation team, including the current scientific program operating under Brandon Fugel's ownership, has found the mesa to be the location where the ranch's phenomena are most concentrated, most consistent, and most resistant to conventional explanation. The physical characteristics of the mesa have been studied extensively without producing a complete understanding of its geology or its composition. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted during the current investigation have produced returns suggesting structural anomalies beneath the mesa's surface that do not correspond to the expected geological profile of the region. Anomalies that the scientific team has discussed publicly in terms that acknowledge their existence without fully accounting for what produced them or what they contain. Drilling operations directed at the mesa have encountered resistance and equipment failure at depths and under conditions that the team's engineers cannot explain through conventional geological frameworks. The airspace above the mesa has produced more documented anomalous aerial phenomena than any other location on the ranch, and the physical effects on researchers who spend extended time in close proximity to the mesa, the health impacts, the equipment malfunctions, The psychological and physiological responses that the show has documented across multiple seasons are more pronounced and more severe in the mesa's vicinity than anywhere else on the property, all of which means that the detection of something alive beneath the mesa is not simply a new data point added to an existing investigation. It is the thing that every phase of Skinwalker Ranch investigation has been moving toward, the answer to the question that the mesa has been generating for decades, arriving in a form that nobody on the scientific team was prepared to receive. Understanding the significance of what the scientific team detected beneath the mesa requires understanding the program that produced the detection. Because the investigation Brandon Fugal has built at Skinwalker Ranch is not a television production using scientific aesthetics for dramatic effect. It is a genuine and substantially funded scientific research program that happens to be documented by a television production, and the distinction matters because it determines the credibility of everything the program produces, including the detection that shut the ranch down. When Brandon Fugal purchased Skinwalker Ranch in 2016 for $4.5 million, he brought to the property something that previous investigation phases had lacked: the combination of substantial private resources, genuine scientific credibility through his connections to the aerospace and technology industries, and a personal commitment to applying the most rigorous available scientific methodology to a set of phenomena that previous investigations had documented but not explained. The team he assembled reflects that commitment. Dr. Travis Taylor, whose background in astrophysics, optical science, and aerospace defense research provided the program with a level of scientific credentialing that no previous Skinwalker Ranch investigation had possessed, was the lead scientist for the program's most intensive investigative phases. The supporting scientific team included specialists in geology, physics, biology, chemistry, and electromagnetic phenomena, as well as engineers with backgrounds in defense and aerospace technology who brought both expertise and equipment to the investigation that would not otherwise have been available to a private research program of this kind. The equipment deployed at the ranch under Fugal's program represents a significant escalation from previous investigation phases. Ground-penetrating radar systems capable of imaging subsurface features at depths and resolutions not previously applied to the property, atmospheric monitoring equipment drawn from aerospace and defense applications, biological detection systems designed for field deployment in environments with complex and variable conditions, and a network of fixed and mobile sensors providing continuous monitoring of the property's electromagnetic, acoustic, and environmental conditions at a level of coverage and resolution that the NIDES program, operating with the technology of the late 1990s, could not have achieved. It is this program, built over years of sustained investment and scientific engagement, that produced the detection beneath the mesa. And it is the credibility of this program, established through seasons of documented scientific work at the ranch, that makes the shutdown Brandon Fugal ordered in response to that detection something that cannot be dismissed as a production decision or a dramatic narrative choice. The detection that changed everything at Skinwalker Ranch did not arrive as a single dramatic instrument reading or a single moment of equipment response. It arrived the way the most significant scientific findings typically arrive, as an accumulation of data from multiple independent systems that individually suggested something unusual and collectively pointed toward a conclusion that the scientific team found both compelling and deeply unsettling. The initial indication came from the ground-penetrating radar system that had been conducting ongoing subsurface surveys of the mesa as part of the investigation's long-term geological mapping program. A survey pass conducted during the most recent phase of investigation returned data showing a subsurface anomaly at a depth consistent with the structural irregularities documented in previous surveys, but with a characteristic that had not appeared in prior data. The anomaly was not static. The returns showed a feature that had changed position between successive survey passes, conducted at intervals that the geological team assessed as too short for any known geological process to account for the degree of positional change recorded. Something beneath the mesa had moved. The geological team's initial response was to treat the finding as an instrument artifact, a malfunction or calibration error in the survey equipment, and to run the survey again with recalibrated instruments before drawing any conclusions. The repeat surveys did not resolve the anomaly. They confirmed it, and they added detail that the initial pass had not captured. The moving feature was not uniform in its subsurface signature. It had a boundary, a defined edge that distinguished it from the surrounding geological material in a way that suggested an object or a mass rather than a fluid or gaseous pocket. And its movement between survey passes was not random. It had direction, and across multiple successive surveys, that direction was consistent, suggesting displacement along a trajectory rather than diffuse shifting in response to environmental pressure. When the radar findings were cross-referenced with data from the biological detection systems that had been operating continuously in the mesa's vicinity, the picture that emerged was one that the scientific team found genuinely difficult to process. The biological sensors had been recording environmental data throughout the period covered by the radar surveys. When that data was reviewed against the timeline of the subsurface anomalies' movements, correlations emerged that the team's scientists assessed as statistically significant. The biological sensor readings elevated during periods corresponding to the anomalies' detected movement, not slightly, substantially and repeatedly, across multiple instances in the data record, with a consistency that the team's statisticians found could not be attributed to coincidence or environmental noise. Something beneath the mesa was moving, and when it moved, the biological detection equipment responded as if something alive was responsible for the movement. The response of the Skinwalker Ranch scientific team to the data produced by the mesa detection was not immediate alarm or immediate shutdown. It was the methodical and disciplined process of scientists who have spent years operating in an environment that consistently produces data that resists explanation, and who have learned, through that experience, to subject anomalous findings to the most rigorous available scrutiny before drawing conclusions. The first response was verification. Every instrument that had contributed data to the anomalous finding was tested, recalibrated, and run through independent diagnostic assessment to rule out equipment malfunction as an explanation. The ground-penetrating radar system was checked against known reference targets to confirm its spatial accuracy and its positional consistency. The biological detection equipment was calibrated against known environmental inputs to establish that its elevated readings during the anomaly periods were not the product of instrument drift or environmental interference. The data processing and analysis pipeline was reviewed by the team's software and engineering specialists to confirm that the correlations identified between the radar data and the biological sensor data were not artifacts of the analytical method. The verification process took time and was conducted with a thoroughness that reflected both the seriousness of the finding and the scientific team's awareness that a conclusion of this magnitude required the complete elimination of conventional explanations before it could be taken seriously. When the verification process was complete, the conventional explanations had been eliminated. The anomaly was real. The movement was real. The correlation between the movement and the biological sensor response was real. What remained, after every instrument check and every analytical review, was data describing something beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch that was moving with direction and consistency, and whose movement was accompanied by biological sensor responses that the team's scientists could not account for through any mechanism other than the presence of a living organism at the depth and location the radar data indicated. That conclusion was presented to Brandon Fugel. His response was immediate. He reviewed the data personally, asked the scientific team to walk him through their verification process, confirmed that the conventional explanations had been thoroughly excluded, and then made the decision that the data required. He shut the investigation down. The decision Brandon Fugel made when the scientific team presented him with the mesa detection data was not a simple decision, and understanding it fully requires understanding both what the data showed and what Brandon Fugel's relationship to the ranch, to the investigation, and to the responsibility of ownership actually is. Brandon Fugel is not a person who shuts things down easily or without substantial cause. He is a businessman of considerable success, accustomed to making decisions under conditions of uncertainty and to proceeding with complex and high-stakes endeavors when the evidence supports doing so. He purchased Skinwalker Ranch over the objections of people in his professional circle who thought the acquisition was irrational. He has continued to invest in its investigation through seasons of findings that raised more questions than they answered, and through personal experiences on the property that he has described as genuinely disturbing. He has watched members of his scientific team suffer health effects from their work at the ranch and has continued the investigation. He is not someone who stops because things are difficult or because the findings are uncomfortable. What the mesa detection data presented him with was something different from discomfort or difficulty. It presented him with a direct implication about what the investigation was dealing with beneath the mesa, an implication that changed the risk calculus for every person operating on the ranch in a fundamental way. If something alive is moving beneath the mesa at the depth and scale the data suggested, the investigation's existing safety protocols were built around an incomplete understanding of what those protocols needed to protect against. Every drilling operation directed at the mesa, every ground disturbance in its vicinity, Every activity that had been conducted on the basis of an understanding of the mesa as a geological feature rather than a geological feature containing living presence needed to be reassessed against a different set of risk parameters. The shutdown was not a retreat. It was a recognition that the investigation had arrived at a threshold where proceeding without a fundamental reassessment of what was being dealt with and what precautions that dealing required would be irresponsible toward the people whose safety Brandon Fugel is responsible for. He shut it down because the data told him that what was beneath the mesa was not what the investigation had assumed, and that assuming incorrectly about what is beneath the mesa has consequences that the scientific team could not yet fully scope. The detection of life beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch raises a question that the scientific community and the broader public interested in the ranch's phenomena will inevitably ask. How did every previous investigation of the property, across decades of research by multiple independent teams with access to the best available technology of their respective eras, miss something that the current program found? The answer to that question is not simple, and it is not flattering to the idea that the previous investigation phases were comprehensive in their scope or their methodology, but it is also not a reflection of incompetence or carelessness on the part of the researchers who conducted them. The NIDES program that investigated the ranch in the late 1990s and early 2000s was operating at the frontier of applied paranormal and anomalous phenomena research with the technology and the methodological frameworks available at that time. The ground-penetrating radar systems available to that program were less capable than the current program's equipment in their depth penetration, their spatial resolution, and their ability to detect subtle changes in subsurface features over time. The biological detection capabilities available to NIDS were not designed for the specific application of detecting biological presence at depth in a complex geological environment. The program documented extraordinary things. It established the foundational evidentiary record for the current investigation to build on, but it was not equipped to find what the current program found, and the absence of a finding is not evidence of an absence. The Sherman family, who preceded NIDS and whose experiences on the property remain the most visceral and the most personally documented in the ranch's recorded history, described encounters and phenomena that, in retrospect, are consistent with an active presence beneath the mesa in ways that were not recognized as such at the time because the framework for interpreting them in those terms did not exist. The cattle mutilations, the disappearances, the sense described by multiple family members of something beneath the ground that was aware of their presence on the surface. These experiences were documented as evidence of the ranch's anomalous character without being understood as potentially diagnostic of specifically biological subsurface presence. What the current program's detection did was not discover something that previous investigations failed to find. It developed the methodological capability to formally detect and document something that the ranch's own history had been pointing toward for decades. The implications of a confirmed living presence beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch extend in multiple directions simultaneously, and none of those directions leads to a simple or comfortable destination. The scientific implications alone are significant enough to represent a fundamental challenge to the existing understanding of what can live where, at what depth, under what conditions, and with what relationship to the surface environment directly above it. The depth at which the detection data places the anomalous biological presence is not a depth at which any known organism of the implied scale is documented to exist in the geological context of the American interior. Known subterranean life at significant depth consists of microbial communities, insects, and small invertebrates occupying cave systems and groundwater environments, none of which produce the scale of biological sensor response or the subsurface displacement profile that the mesa detection data describes. Whatever is living beneath the mesa, if the scientific team's interpretation of the data is correct, is something that the existing biological and geological literature has no category for, and the absence of that category is not a minor gap. It is a hole in the scientific understanding of what is possible in the natural world large enough to require a significant and sustained revision of multiple fields of research simultaneously. The implications for the ranch's documented history of anomalous phenomena are equally significant. If there is a living presence beneath the mesa, the phenomena that have been documented above it for decades, the equipment failures, the health effects on researchers, the atmospheric anomalies, the aerial phenomena concentrated in the mesa's airspace, become potentially explicable as the surface manifestations of an active subsurface biology rather than as independent and unconnected anomalies. The mesa would not be the location where Skinwalker Ranch's phenomena are most concentrated because of some abstract property of the geography. It would be the location where they are most concentrated because something living there is generating them, either directly through its biological processes or indirectly through whatever mechanisms it uses to interact with the environment above it. That reframing changes the entire investigative program. It changes what questions the investigation should be asking, what evidence it should be prioritizing, and what the goal of the investigation actually is. Because understanding a geological and electromagnetic anomaly is a different project from understanding a living organism that has apparently occupied the space beneath the mesa for a period of time that the investigation has not yet been able to determine. The public statement Brandon Fugal has made about the mesa detection and the shutdown of the investigation is carefully bounded. He has confirmed that the scientific team found something significant. He has confirmed that the findings prompted him to halt the current phase of investigation. He has framed the shutdown in terms that acknowledge the seriousness of what was detected, without fully characterizing what the detection showed or what the scientific team's interpretation of the data concluded. The gap between what he has said publicly and what the people close to the investigation know he knows is a gap that those who follow Skinwalker Ranch closely have learned to read carefully, because Brandon Fugal is not a person given to understatement, and when he is understating, the distance between what he is saying and what he knows is itself a measure of how significant the undisclosed information is. The people close to the investigation describe a Brandon Fugal who has not simply been shaken by the mesa detection data in the way that a dramatic and unexpected scientific finding shakes someone. They describe a man who has been processing a specific and detailed understanding of what the data implies, and who has been doing that processing against the backdrop of everything he has personally witnessed and experienced at the ranch across years of ownership. Brandon Fugal has had experiences on the Skinwalker Ranch property that he has not fully disclosed publicly. He has been deliberately measured in what he shares about his personal encounters at the ranch, more measured than the members of his scientific team who have spoken more openly about the effects the property has had on them. And that measured quality of his public persona on the subject of the ranch is understood by the people who know him to reflect not a lack of significant personal experience, but a deliberate choice about how much of that experience to bring into the public conversation at any given point. The mesa detection data gave that deliberate choice a new and more urgent dimension. What Fugal knows about what is beneath the mesa, assembled from years of personal experience at the ranch, from conversations with the scientific team that have not been made public, and from the specific content of the detection data itself, is a body of knowledge that his public statements have been carefully shaped around without fully revealing. The shutdown he ordered was driven by that knowledge, and the terms on which he will eventually share it fully are terms that the current moment has not yet produced. The shutdown Brandon Fugal ordered is not the end of the Skinwalker Ranch investigation. It is the end of the investigation as it was previously configured, operating on assumptions about the mesa that the detection data has permanently invalidated. What comes next is structured around a single question that everything before it has been building toward. What is living beneath the mesa? The biological material and the full detection data record are being analyzed now, and the results of that analysis will determine the terms on which the investigation resumes and the terms on which what was found is disclosed publicly. For Brandon Fugal, this is the moment his 6 years of ownership have produced. He came to the ranch for answers. The mesa detection is an answer, but one that opens onto questions larger than anything the investigation began with. Something is beneath the mesa. It is alive. It has been there across decades of documented phenomena that the people above it could not explain because they did not yet know what was generating them. Now they know. What Brandon Fugal does with that knowledge is the chapter everything before it was building toward.
Skinwalker Ranch owner Brandon Fugal finally addressed the moment that nearly ended the investigation for good. In a rare unscripted statement, he admitted there was a point during excavation beneath the mesa when the team encountered something so unnatural, so reactive, that he immediately ordered the dig to stop. According to Fugal, the discovery posed unpredictable consequences and should have never been disturbed. Camera feeds were cut, thermal data confiscated, and the area sealed, Subscribe for the full breakdown, because what he just revealed changes everything. For months, the team at Skinwalker Ranch monitored unexplained interference patterns beneath the southern edge of the mesa, patterns that didn't match naturally occurring geological movement or standard electromagnetic fluctuation. The sensors, buried across multiple depth points, began registering rhythmic pulses at precise intervals, almost like something cycling or responding from below. At first, it was shrugged off as instrumentation error. But when multiple systems, thermal, seismic, and radar, recorded the same frequencies simultaneously, attention shifted. Brandon Fugel initially resisted excavation. Despite being the owner and main financial backer, he repeatedly warned that disturbing soil at locations with active anomalies had historically resulted in escalation, referencing earlier incidents when drilling triggered unexplained mechanical failures and skyborne activity. Pressure to investigate mounted after an unmarked low-pressure point was detected below the mesa that showed no geological reason for existing. The team believed there could be an underground structure, potentially artificial, buried, and undisturbed. Fugel hesitated, but approved the pre-excavation radar survey under strict environmental containment protocol. When ground-penetrating radar returned an image, angular, with seemingly straight-lined contours, debate erupted. Phil Torres argued it could be a chamber or collapsed facility. Technical staff believed it might be natural stratification, but the most unsettling point came from an acoustics consultant who noted the returned echo profile aligned more with open density, as if something hollow existed beneath them. Several advisors suggested pausing. A Ute tribal liaison quietly recommended avoiding that specific area, recounting generational warnings tied to that stretch of the mesa, stating, "The ground remembers what's placed in it." Fugel considered canceling, but after multiple failed attempts to explain the readings conventionally, he reluctantly authorized Stage 1 soil removal under daylight supervision only. The first dig was shallow, controlled, minor, and monitored live. Nothing unusual occurred, but as depth increased past the first meter, the anomaly reacted differently. Equipment stability dropped sharply, sensors failed to recalibrate, and the pulse pattern intensified. From that moment, the team believed they might not just be uncovering something, but possibly interacting with it. And as they moved deeper into the earth, reactions intensified. The moment the ground shifted was coming, and no one was ready. The excavation entered its second stage at 10:03 a.m., under strict control and supervised by both geological and technical personnel. With the initial meter cleared, everything appeared stable. Instrumentation still flickered occasionally, but no obvious environmental hazards emerged. A light wind moved through the canyon. Crew members later noted that it felt deceptively calm, as if the location was waiting. As the excavator dug past the 2-meter depth, however, the sensors, previously pulsing at irregular intervals, suddenly began registering at exact 10.6-second cycles, active across multiple platforms simultaneously. This forced the team to pause and recalibrate. The calibration failed. Drone reconnaissance was deployed next, but both drones experienced unexpected downward thrust, even with stable weather readings. Flight logs showed artificial interference manipulating altitude controls. The machines struggled to ascend more than 10 feet above the dig site. Engineers assumed electromagnetic disruption, but Phil Torres privately suggested something in the ground seemed to be pulling, as though resisting aerial observation. The digging resumed manually to avoid triggering automated system reactions. By late afternoon, the exposed area revealed discolored soil compressed into distinct layers, unnaturally flat, not consistent with natural sedimentation. A geologist pointed out faint trace elements of compounds that should not exist at that depth unless introduced artificially. The moment that raised the most concern came when a contractor accidentally placed his gloved hand against the soil deposit. He reported feeling a low-frequency vibration in his sternum, like a heartbeat inside rock. He removed his hand instantly and claimed his chest felt tight for several minutes. Data collected from localized ground sensors at that exact moment registered a 0.2 microtremor, despite no seismic activity recorded within 200 miles. Phil requested deeper core sampling to understand what lay beneath the newly exposed strata. Fugal hesitated, but approved the test given the emerging significance. As the core drill advanced, air pressure around the site began dropping. For 17 seconds, sound meters detected a compression wave moving outward from the shaft. Yet, no wind occurred. The crew started hearing faint, rhythmic thumps, felt through their boots, not heard through the air. One technician later wrote it felt like being above something, breathing. They kept digging. None of them understood that what they were encountering wasn't being uncovered. It was responding. And within hours, the first truly alarming shift would take place. Because when night fell over the mesa, the ground itself began to move. Dig operations had ceased for the evening at precisely 6:48 p.m. While surface-level conditions remained outwardly stable, multiple team members had filed quiet concerns about prolonged internal unease. The monitoring posts were left active overnight per Fugal's request, collecting ambient seismic, thermal, and radio frequency data. Just before midnight, the first alert triggered automatically on the remote surveillance terminal. What registered initially appeared as a microquake, but the pulse signature did not match geological behavior. It was too symmetrical. Data compared against ambient wave patterns suggested directional energy pulsing from below, not lateral displacement typical of seismic motion. Phil was the first to return to the dig site, arriving with a field technician. The air was unnaturally still. Visual observation showed no shifts on the surface, but when logging sonar returned, what they saw was described as subsurface volumetric fluctuation, a slow uplift followed by a subtle release, spaced exactly 11 seconds apart, as if the Earth itself were exhaling and inhaling. Jessica arrived moments later and noted the ground felt slightly warm, despite temperature drops at night. Instrument readings showed a localized heat difference of 4.2 degrees, confined to a 21-foot radius directly around the excavation pit. The team activated ground microphones to isolate the source of the pulses. What came through was unlike anything logged on previous investigations. Instead of chaotic interference or audio warping, the signal was uniform, repetitive, like coded vibration. A field acoustic analyst later noted it resembled resonance intended to stabilize mass, not disperse it. Moments later, one of the stabilization sensors collapsed inward, falling into the hole despite being securely staked outside the cut line. Equipment readings began failing. Battery life dropped at accelerated speed, signal loss cascaded across receivers, and core drill telemetry spiked at 400% activity, despite being inactive. Phil radioed Fugal directly, advising temporary suspension and evacuation. According to internal report snippets, before issuing his directive, Fugal asked one question: is the ground rising? The next reading answered for them. The soil within the pit swelled upward approximately 1.3 centimeters without external pressure. Movement was slow but undeniable. A technician watching the live thermal overlay gasped, claiming he saw a pattern forming along the lifted earth, something repeating the same frequency signature logged earlier. Then alarms triggered simultaneously across all monitors. The ground didn't just shift again, it reacted. And when the team replayed the footage from this moment, Fugal made the decision that changed the entire course of the excavation. During the incident, the primary live cameras failed exactly as expected once the anomaly spiked, but an auxiliary security feed, stored on an off-network recorder, kept running. It wasn't part of the official telemetry grid and only existed as a backup, intended for visual asset security. Hours later, when the crew reviewed the footage, nobody expected to see anything beyond static. What they found instead became the most alarming piece of visual evidence ever recorded at Skinwalker Ranch. At 11:53 p.m., as the soil rose and then slowly settled, the camera captured a distortion forming just beneath the excavation rig. It appeared as a faint compression ripple, followed by a sudden pull inward, like mass was consolidating in a localized pocket. Infrared overlay, for a split second, registered a human-sized void occupying the exact center of the pit. But unlike regular temperature anomalies, this one showed no heat signature, no reflection, and no surface disruption. It appeared, stabilized momentarily, and then sank deeper, as if aware of observation. Slow-motion audio sync revealed a harmonic tone that flickered precisely when the distortion appeared. One analyst said the anomaly looked like something under the soil was testing the surface tension, not breaking through, just applying pressure. When replayed with contrast enhancement, it appeared that faint branching cracks formed cyclically in the dirt, not random patterned, suggesting controlled stress. That's when Brandon Fugel, watching remotely, uttered the words later repeated in confidentiality. "Shut it down! We should have never dug there." The excavation officially ended in that moment, but the ground did not stop reacting. The moment the auxiliary feed was replayed and the anomaly's behavior confirmed, Brandon Fugel arrived at the control hub unannounced. Witnesses describe him as unusually calm but visibly tense, watching the footage on silent loop. After a prolonged pause, he requested the final seismic overlay. When the technician zoomed in on the subsurface displacement model, Fugel reportedly whispered, "It's zeroed in on the excavation point." Moments later, localized vibration returned, this time increasing in frequency, mirroring the exact timestamp where the technician earlier reported chest pressure. The crew noted that the readings didn't resemble geological activity at all. Instead, they displayed progression, targeted movement shifting lower into the shaft. At 12:07 a.m., he issued the official order. "Seal it immediately. No more cutting. No more testing. We shouldn't have dug there." Those words froze the room. Production halted. Excavators were withdrawn. Within minutes, the site became restricted, and the crew was repositioned outside the containment zone. Engineers attempted to document residual sensor output, but the readings began fluctuating independently, even with all equipment disconnected. Battery packs dropping to zero, core sampling rigs warming unexpectedly, and minor electromagnetic pulses clustering around the excavation rim despite zero incoming power. One contractor reported that the soil reshaped slightly again, this time not upward, but compressing toward the perimeter, like the ground trying to reset itself. He refused to continue work and later filed for removal from the project. Fugel personally instructed that the dig zone be filled and sealed with reinforced mineral packing, not standard soil. He demanded that no personnel re-enter the site until further notice and insisted that data logs skip automated cloud backup to prevent off-site distribution. In post-brief discussion, his stance shifted from curiosity to containment. "Whatever is beneath this mesa," he said, "it wasn't meant to be disturbed, and it knew when we tried." What he didn't expect was that the anomaly would continue reacting even after being buried. After the dig site was sealed and equipment disconnected, the crew expected activity to cease immediately. Instead, sensors that were supposed to be offline began transmitting residual readings without any recorded power source. Auto-logging captured a sequence of faint but consistent fluctuations in the newly packed material, as if something beneath it was still adjusting. At 1:14 a.m., nearly an hour after shutdown, the remote seismic monitor registered directional movement, not toward the excavation pit, but away from it, slow, measured, deliberate, heading northeast along the underground gradient. Phil Torres, still on site analyzing live feeds, noticed that the movement aligned exactly with the path where the crew stood during their final minutes at the pit. Heat void signatures ran parallel to footprints captured earlier that afternoon. Forensic technicians later confirmed a 0.8-degree drop in temperature within those exact coordinates, like something was tracing the path back. One analyst noted the pattern mimicked human pacing. What alarmed the team wasn't the shift itself, it was what happened when they reviewed thermal scans from the moments after sealing. The mass didn't just move beneath the earth, it elevated slightly, creating a spectral impression hugging the underside of topsoil. It followed where people had stood, pausing for seconds at points where crew members reported anxiety earlier in the investigation. At 1:26 a.m., a ground microphone, left unintentionally active, captured a low, gliding frequency that corresponded directly with the seismic shift. It wasn't random. The pattern matched the timing of the technician's heartbeat from the collapse event hours earlier. That's when the medical lead advised temporary withdrawal, stating, "If this thing can align to someone's physiology, we may not be at risk from proximity, but from recognition." The crew cleared the zone completely by 1:40 a.m., but the scans continued recording movement beneath the mesa, and by morning, at least one team member would admit they didn't sleep, not because of what they saw, but because of what they felt might leave the ground next. By morning, the excavation site showed no visible disturbance. The seal packing appeared intact. No instruments triggered alarms. On the surface, it looked as if nothing had happened. But the change didn't come from beneath the mesa. It came from the people who'd been closest to it. Within hours, 3 crew members reported deep chest pressure, not pain, but a sensation described as like gravity pulling into my ribs. One technician said he could still feel the rhythmic pulses they'd detected underground, even though no monitors registered ongoing anomalies. Another admitted he avoided stepping anywhere near the dig site, despite no logical reason, stating bluntly, "It feels like standing over something that remembers you were here." During medical assessment, mild tremors were observed in 2 individuals when shown footage of the excavation area. Even without sound, their heart rates accelerated in perfect sync with the timestamp where ground displacement had been detected the night before. A visiting analyst confirmed that even reviewing still images triggered physiological responses consistent with anticipation stress. No one wanted to use the word fear, but more than one admitted to feeling recognized. Psychological observations documented recurring dreams reported by 2 crew members. Both described being beneath the soil, aware of moonlight above them but unable to reach the surface. One wrote privately that they woke believing they heard the ground breathing through me. Neither returned to the mesa that day. Brandon Fugel suspended all subterranean operations indefinitely, stating that future investigations would avoid direct intrusion of ground-level anomaly. He reportedly told senior staff, "Whatever was under us, interacting with it may have allowed it to interact with us." What he didn't disclose publicly was that the anomaly had not fully receded, and in the hours ahead, records would reveal it wasn't finished reacting. Earlier today, when pressed during a recorded interview about why excavation beneath the mesa was halted without public explanation, Brandon Fugel finally addressed the event directly. His response was brief but deliberate. He stated, "We began digging because we believed we were investigating something passive. What I realized too late was that we were interacting with something active." The room fell silent. He went on to explain that while the team expected geological feedback or possible industrial remnants, what appeared during the survey showed signs of conscious reaction. "It didn't behave like pressure release. It behaved like awareness," he added. When asked whether the team had disturbed something, Fugel paused before replying, "I believe we caused an environmental response that was not naturally occurring, and we should have never dug there." He emphasized the decision to cease operations was not made out of caution, but out of prevention. His final comments suggested deeper concern than logistical risk. Some discoveries should only be observed, not touched, because once you interact with them, they can interact back. The interviewer attempted to clarify if the phenomenon posed danger to the public. Fugel didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "We sealed it because it reacted to attention. And if you air something like that, you amplify it." Seconds later, the network cut to a break. When cameras returned, no further questions about excavation were allowed. Following Fugel's statement, internal sources confirmed that the excavation site remains sealed under reinforced containment material, now monitored exclusively through remote sensors at carefully controlled intervals. No crew members are permitted to physically step onto the location without written authorization from both the medical supervisor and Fugel himself. Even then, conditions stipulate daylight-only presence and zero soil disturbance. Recent reports state that new anomalies continue to register intermittently: subtle changes in ground density patterns, low-frequency audio traces, and occasional microfluctuations in thermal readings. None have escalated beyond initial thresholds, but analysts note that each event spikes when historical footage from the dig is reviewed in proximity to the mesa. Production officials have quietly moved excavation operations to alternate areas with less sensor interference. Equipment originally used in the dig has been isolated in storage and flagged with a limited exposure protocol, meaning only designated personnel can access the machinery and only while monitored. Two technicians who experienced post-digature symptoms are no longer active on the project and requested assignment removal, citing prolonged internal dissonance. While no official statement links these symptoms to the excavation, multiple internal memos acknowledge persistent effect markers. To date, there are no plans to resume digging at the site. Future investigations will rely solely on above-ground scanning and atmospheric tracking. In a closed meeting, Fugel reportedly said, "We didn't find something buried. We woke something that already knew we were here." When asked if he fears that whatever reacted underground might re-emerge, he responded, "It's still reacting. We're choosing not to provoke it further." For now, the site remains sealed. The ground is silent, but few believe it is still. And while no formal closure has been announced, those involved in the dig already understand the truth. They will never dig there again. Not because they can't, but because they shouldn't. And the deeper question now isn't what's buried under Skinwalker Ranch. It's what might already be awake beneath it.
During a laser experiment on Skinwalker Ranch, crew members were physically attacked by an unknown force. Dr. Travis Taylor was thrown backward. Eric Bard collapsed with radiation exposure. Multiple injuries required hospitalization. Medical records confirm the damage. The footage captured it all. Subscribe for the full investigation into what attacked Brandon Fugel's team. The investigation that would result in the most violent incident in Skinwalker Ranch history began with what seemed like a straightforward scientific experiment designed by Dr. Travis Taylor to test a controversial hypothesis about the anomaly zone above the property. For months, the team had documented strange phenomena occurring in the airspace directly above the mesa: unexplained radar returns, GPS failures, and electromagnetic disturbances that defied conventional explanation. Travis theorized that whatever caused these anomalies might be responsive to specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, particularly high-powered laser emissions in the infrared spectrum. Brandon Fugel approved a significant budget expenditure to acquire military-grade laser equipment capable of projecting concentrated beams into the anomaly zone at precise frequencies Travis had calculated based on previous sensor data. The experiment was ambitious and potentially groundbreaking. If successful, it could provide the first reproducible method for triggering and studying the phenomena under controlled conditions rather than waiting for spontaneous occurrences. The setup took an entire day, with Travis personally overseeing the installation of laser arrays, sensor equipment, and recording devices positioned across the mesa to capture data from multiple angles simultaneously. Brandon invited additional scientific observers, including physicists and aerospace engineers, to witness the experiment and provide independent verification of results. The atmosphere was one of excitement and anticipation rather than concern. Nobody on the team believed they were doing anything particularly dangerous. They'd conducted dozens of experiments at the ranch without incident, and this seemed like just another data collection opportunity using more sophisticated equipment than previous investigations. The experiment was scheduled for early evening when atmospheric conditions were optimal and the setting sun wouldn't interfere with laser visibility. As the team assembled on the mesa and Travis began the activation sequence for the laser array, everyone felt confident this would be a routine scientific investigation that might yield interesting data. Within minutes, that confidence would be shattered as something responded to their laser emissions with immediate and violent hostility. The footage from that evening shows the exact moment when scientific curiosity crossed a boundary into genuine danger, triggering a response from whatever intelligence or phenomenon exists at Skinwalker Ranch that proved it could and would defend itself against perceived threats with physical force. Dr. Travis Taylor was operating the primary laser control station, making fine adjustments to beam frequency and intensity while monitoring real-time sensor feedback displayed on multiple laptop screens arrayed before him. The footage shows Travis focused intently on his work, calling out technical observations to the team about electromagnetic readings that were beginning to spike in ways consistent with his theoretical predictions. For approximately 8 minutes, the experiment proceeded exactly as planned. The lasers were projecting into the anomaly zone, Sensors were collecting data, and cameras were recording everything from multiple angles for later analysis. Then something changed. Travis noticed a sudden surge in electromagnetic readings that exceeded anything the equipment was designed to measure, causing several sensors to overload and shut down automatically. He reached for the laser controls to reduce power output, concerned that the equipment was malfunctioning or that they were inadvertently creating a feedback loop. Before Travis could touch the controls, he was violently struck by an invisible force that witnesses describe as impossibly powerful. The camera footage captures the moment in disturbing clarity. Travis is standing normally one instant, then the next. He's thrown backwards several feet, as if hit by a massive unseen impact. His body leaves the ground entirely before crashing into equipment behind him, with enough force to damage the metal cases and cause Travis to cry out in obvious pain. The entire incident occurs in less than 2 seconds, but the violence and power behind whatever struck him is undeniable on the footage. Team members rushed to Travis immediately, finding him dazed and struggling to breathe from what appeared to be blunt force trauma to his chest and abdomen. When they helped him to his feet and examined him, visible injuries were already forming, dark bruising across his torso in a pattern that suggested impact from a large focused force rather than falling against equipment edges. Travis insisted he hadn't tripped or lost his balance. Something had physically hit him with tremendous power from a direction where nothing visible existed on any camera angle. Brandon Fugel made the immediate decision to shut down the laser array and secure Travis' medical attention. But before the team could begin powering down equipment, the situation escalated dramatically as additional crew members came under attack. Eric Bard was positioned approximately 30 yards from Travis at a secondary monitoring station, collecting spectrographic data and observing atmospheric changes during the laser experiment. When Travis was attacked, Eric had immediately started moving toward him to provide assistance. But before he'd covered half the distance, he suddenly stopped, staggered, and collapsed to his knees, clutching his head and upper body. The footage shows Eric's collapse happening within seconds of Travis being struck, suggesting a coordinated assault on multiple team members rather than isolated incidents. Crew members who reached Eric first found him in severe distress. He was vomiting. His skin was flushed and hot to the touch, and he reported intense burning sensations across his exposed skin areas, including his face, neck, and hands. The symptoms were consistent with acute radiation exposure, which seemed impossible given that no radiation sources were present in the experiment beyond normal background levels. Eric was clearly in worse condition than Travis, unable to stand without support and exhibiting signs of shock, including rapid heartbeat, shallow breathing, and disorientation about where he was and what had happened. Brandon ordered immediate evacuation and called for emergency medical response, recognizing this had escalated beyond anything the team's first aid training could handle. While waiting for paramedics, team members noticed something disturbing. Eric's exposed skin areas were developing visible burns that appeared to be progressing in real time, starting as redness but darkening to second-degree burn appearance within minutes. Medical equipment the team had on site for monitoring crew health during investigations revealed elevated radiation readings on Eric's body and clothing that exceeded safe exposure limits. This was medically impossible. Radiation doesn't spontaneously appear on a person without a source, and there were no radioactive materials anywhere near the experiment site. When paramedics arrived and transported Eric to the hospital, emergency room physicians were baffled by his presentation. The burns, radiation readings, and systemic symptoms were consistent with significant radiation exposure, yet there was no logical source for such exposure. Eric's condition stabilized after several hours of treatment, but the medical mystery of how he'd been exposed to radiation in the middle of a Utah desert remained completely unexplained. The incident proved that whatever had attacked Travis hadn't stopped with a single victim. It had systematically targeted multiple team members with different forms of assault. Brandon Fugel stood on the mesa watching 2 of his team members injured and possibly dying, facing the most difficult decision of his tenure as Skinwalker Ranch owner. As a successful businessman accustomed to calculated risks and data-driven decisions, Brandon now confronted a situation where no amount of wealth, planning, or expertise could guarantee his team's safety against threats that defied scientific explanation. His first instinct was immediate evacuation, get everyone off the mesa, shut down all experiments, and regroup once injuries were assessed and medical professionals provided guidance. But the scientist part of Brandon recognized they were documenting something unprecedented. Whatever had attacked Travis and Eric had responded to their experiment in ways that proved intelligence, awareness, and capability for physical interaction with humans. This was exactly the kind of breakthrough evidence the ranch had been seeking for decades, and abandoning the investigation meant potentially losing data that could never be replicated. The ethical calculation was brutal. Continue collecting data while people were being injured, or prioritize immediate safety over scientific discovery. Brandon made calls to medical consultants describing Eric's symptoms, seeking guidance on whether they were dealing with a medical emergency requiring immediate hospital transport or something that could be managed on-site while securing equipment and data. The responses were alarming. Radiation exposure severe enough to cause visible burns and systemic symptoms required immediate professional medical intervention and potentially weeks of monitoring for delayed effects, including organ damage and immune system compromise. There was no ethical justification for keeping Eric on the mesa 1 second longer than necessary for safe transport. Travis, despite his own injuries and obvious pain, argued for continuing the experiment. He recognized the scientific importance of what they were documenting and believed they could implement safety protocols to protect remaining team members while collecting additional data. Brandon overruled him, making the definitive call to shut down all equipment and evacuate to the command center. But even that decision proved complicated when something began attacking from above, making evacuation itself dangerous. Brandon found himself coordinating a retreat under hostile conditions from an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't defend against using any conventional security measures. His background in real estate development and business management had prepared him for financial risks and complex negotiations, not tactical evacuation of personnel under assault from unexplained phenomena. As the team began shutting down equipment and preparing to evacuate the mesa, the attacks escalated in a way that suggested whatever they'd provoked was determined to prevent them from leaving, or perhaps to punish them for the laser experiment. Multiple crew members reported feeling impacts from above, not gentle touches or subjective sensations, but forceful strikes that knocked equipment from their hands and caused them to stumble or fall. The camera footage captures several incidents where objects and people appear to be struck by invisible forces from the empty sky above. One particularly dramatic sequence shows a heavy metal equipment case being lifted off the ground and thrown laterally across the mesa, traveling at least 15 feet before crashing down and breaking open. No wind, no visible force, just the case suddenly airborne and violently displaced. Physics alone made this impossible. The case weighed over 40 pounds and would require significant force applied at precise angles to achieve the trajectory captured on video. Crew members scrambled to secure equipment and themselves as the aerial assault continued. Sound equipment recorded bizarre audio during this period, deep rumbling sounds that seemed to come from directly overhead despite clear skies, high-pitched whining noises that hurt team members' ears and couldn't be isolated to any equipment source, and what several people described as a rhythmic pulsing that they felt physically in their chests, like standing near massive subwoofers at a concert. The coordinated nature of the attack suggested intelligence. Different crew members were being targeted with different types of assault simultaneously, as if something was observing their positions and choosing appropriate methods to harass or injure each person. Brandon's security personnel attempted to provide protection, but were helpless against threats they couldn't see or predict. One security officer was struck hard enough to knock his radio from his belt, the device skittering across the mesa as if kicked by an invisible foot. Another reported feeling hands pushing against his back, trying to force him toward the mesa's edge, though no one was near him, and footage confirmed he was isolated from other team members. The psychological terror of being under attack from unseen forces was as damaging as the physical impacts. Trained security professionals accustomed to assessing and responding to threats found themselves completely ineffective against an enemy that violated every assumption about how physical reality operates. While chaos unfolded on the mesa, Ranch Superintendent Thomas Winterton and Chief Security Officer Bryant Arnold were positioned at the ranch perimeter, monitoring access points and maintaining communication with the investigation team. Their experience that night proved the attacks weren't confined to the Mesa experiment site, but were happening simultaneously across different areas of the property. Thomas was conducting a routine perimeter check in his vehicle when he reported via radio that he was being followed by something he couldn't see, but could hear moving through brush parallel to the road. The sound was too large and too coordinated to be wildlife, and it maintained pace with his vehicle even as he accelerated. When Thomas stopped to investigate with spotlights, he saw nothing. But the moment he turned off his vehicle's lights, he heard what he described as footsteps approaching his position from multiple directions simultaneously, as if he was being surrounded. His radio transmission to Bryant captured genuine fear in his voice as he requested immediate backup. Bryant responded in his security vehicle but experienced catastrophic equipment failure en route. His radio cut out mid-transmission. His vehicle's electrical system began malfunctioning with lights flickering and engine sputtering. and his GPS navigation showed his location as somewhere over 100 miles away, despite being on ranch property he'd driven countless times. The equipment failures left Bryant stranded and unable to reach Thomas or communicate with the command center. Both men were effectively isolated in darkness on a property where something was demonstrating hostile intent toward the investigation team. The most terrifying aspect of their experience was the physical attacks they endured while separated and vulnerable. Thomas reported being shoved hard enough to stumble while standing outside his vehicle trying to restart his radio. He felt distinct pressure against his chest and shoulders, as if invisible hands were pushing him. And when he retreated into his vehicle and turned on interior lights, he discovered fresh scratches on his arms that were bleeding and stinging. Bryant had similar experiences. Objects in his vehicle were knocked from their positions. His rearview mirror was violently twisted sideways, and he felt repeated impacts against the vehicle's exterior as if something was striking the doors and hood with considerable force. The radio eventually came back online with Bryant and Thomas both reporting to Brandon that they were under attack and requesting permission to evacuate the property entirely. The physical evidence from the Skinwalker Ranch attacks provided undeniable proof that something had caused genuine harm to multiple team members, documented through medical records that would stand up to legal and scientific scrutiny. Eric Bard's hospital evaluation revealed radiation exposure levels that triggered mandatory reporting to federal authorities who monitor such incidents for public safety and national security purposes. His radiation readings measured at levels consistent with proximity to industrial radioactive sources or medical radiation equipment, yet no such sources existed anywhere near the ranch during the experiment. The burns on Eric's skin were classified as second-degree thermal and radiation burns, requiring specialized treatment including topical medications and monitoring for infection. Blood work showed elevated white blood cell counts and other markers consistent with the body's response to radiation damage, effects that typically take hours or days to appear but manifested in Eric within minutes of exposure. Medical professionals who treated Eric documented their findings with the caveat that the exposure source remained unknown and unexplained, unusual language in medical records that typically identify specific causes for injuries. Travis Taylor's injuries were equally well documented, though different in nature. X-rays revealed soft tissue trauma across his chest and abdomen consistent with blunt force impact from a large object striking him with significant velocity. The bruising patterns were photographed and measured, showing an impact zone approximately 12 inches in diameter, centered on his sternum and spreading across his ribs. Sports medicine specialists consulted about the injuries compared them to impacts seen in football players hit by tackles or martial artists struck during full contact sparring, the kind of damage that requires substantial force delivered by something solid. What made Travis's injuries medically puzzling was the absence of corresponding external trauma. When someone is hit hard enough to cause that level of internal bruising, there's typically skin abrasions, cuts, or surface damage from whatever struck them. Travis had none of that. His skin was intact except for the deep bruising, as if he'd been hit by something that could deliver tremendous force without surface friction or cutting edges. Thomas Winterton and Bryant Arnold's scratches were examined by medical staff and photographed for documentation. The scratch patterns were analyzed and determined to be consistent with fingernail or claw marks rather than contact with equipment edges or vegetation. The injuries were fresh, appearing during the investigation period, and located on body areas that were covered by clothing when the men left the command center. Dr. Travis Taylor, despite his own injuries, immediately began analyzing the data collected during the attack, determined to find scientific explanations for what had happened to him and his team members. His preliminary analysis revealed electromagnetic anomalies that correlated precisely with the timing of each physical attack, suggesting a connection between energy phenomena and the violence experienced by the crew. During the 8 minutes of laser operation before Travis was struck, sensors detected a progressive buildup of electromagnetic energy in the anomaly zone at frequencies that matched the laser emissions, but at amplitudes exponentially higher than what the equipment was producing. Travis theorized they'd inadvertently created a resonance effect where the laser energy was being amplified by something in the atmosphere or space above the mesa, building to levels that triggered a defensive or retaliatory response from whatever generates the phenomena. The moment of Travis's attack corresponded exactly with a massive electromagnetic pulse detected by equipment positioned around the mesa. The pulse registered across multiple sensor types simultaneously. Magnetometers, RF spectrum analyzers, and electric field detectors all recorded spikes that exceeded their measurement capabilities by orders of magnitude. The pulse originated from a point in the anomaly zone directly above where Travis was standing and propagated outward in a focused beam rather than radiating equally in all directions. This directional characteristic suggested intentional targeting rather than random energy discharge. Eric Bard's radiation exposure remained the most scientifically puzzling aspect because radiation detectors positioned around the mesa showed no elevated readings in the environment, only on Eric's body and clothing after his collapse. Travis hypothesized that Eric had been exposed to a highly localized and brief burst of radiation, intense enough to cause damage, but short-lived enough to dissipate before environmental sensors could detect it. This would require technology or natural phenomena capable of generating and directing radiation with precision that exceeded any known human capability. The aerial assault phase showed even more interesting data. High-speed cameras captured frame-by-frame sequences of objects being displaced, and careful analysis revealed subtle atmospheric distortions at the moment of impact, like heat shimmer or gravitational lensing effects that indicated something was present even if not directly visible. Travis believed they were observing camouflaged or phase-shifted matter that could interact physically with normal matter, while remaining largely invisible to human perception and most sensor types. The violent attacks during the Mesa experiment fundamentally transformed how Brandon Fugel approaches investigations at Skinwalker Ranch, implementing safety protocols that acknowledge the genuine physical dangers posed by whatever phenomena exist on the property. The most immediate change was mandatory medical monitoring for all personnel during investigations. Team members now wear biosensors that continuously track heart rate, blood pressure, body temperature, and radiation exposure, with real-time data transmitted to medical personnel stationed at the command center who can order immediate evacuation if dangerous physiological changes are detected. Brandon invested in a mobile medical unit permanently stationed at the ranch, equipped with emergency treatment capabilities and staffed by paramedics trained in radiation exposure response, trauma care, and psychological crisis intervention. The unit includes equipment to measure and document radiation levels on individuals, allowing immediate assessment of exposure risks. All investigation plans now undergo safety review by an independent committee including physicians, radiation safety experts, and security professionals who assess potential risks and recommend protective measures before experiments are approved. High-risk investigations require written, informed consent from all participants acknowledging specific dangers and agreeing they understand experiments might trigger hostile responses from unknown phenomena. Brandon also implemented tactical withdrawal protocols, predetermined evacuation routes, rally points, and communication procedures for situations where investigations need to be abandoned quickly under potentially hostile conditions. Security personnel receive training in protecting team members from threats that may not be visible or predictable using conventional security methods. The psychological impact on team members has been significant and ongoing. Travis Taylor, despite being a trained scientist comfortable with uncertainty and unexplained phenomena, admits the experience changed his perspective on Skinwalker Ranch investigations. He's more cautious now about experiments that might be perceived as aggressive or threatening by whatever intelligence or phenomenon exists at the ranch, recognizing that their laser experiment may have crossed a boundary that provoked retaliation. Some crew members requested transfers to other projects after witnessing the attacks, unwilling to continue working at a location where they might be physically harmed by forces they can't understand or defend against. Brandon has made counseling resources available to all staff and doesn't pressure anyone to participate in investigations they're uncomfortable with. For 5 seasons, Dr. Travis Taylor served as chief scientist on The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, investigating phenomena that defied conventional physics and documenting evidence that mainstream science couldn't explain. Subscribe now because in 2024, Travis made a shocking announcement. He will never return to Skinwalker Ranch under any circumstances, and the reason has nothing to do with contracts or scheduling. 3 hospitalizations for radiation exposure, permanent health damage confirmed by doctors, family ultimatums, classified government briefings revealing 30-year cover-ups, and psychological effects that still haunt him made the decision final. This is why Travis Taylor refuses to return to Skinwalker Ranch and what he knows that terrifies him. In March 2024, during what was supposed to be a routine podcast interview about his work on various scientific projects, Dr. Travis Taylor made an unexpected statement that sent shockwaves through the Skinwalker Ranch fan community and raised serious questions about what he experienced during 5 seasons investigating the Utah property. When asked casually by the podcast host whether he would consider returning to Skinwalker Ranch for future seasons or special investigations, Travis's response was immediate and unequivocal in ways that surprised everyone listening. He stated flatly that he would never return to Skinwalker Ranch under any circumstances, that no amount of money or scientific opportunity could convince him to set foot on that property again, and that the decision was final and non-negotiable. The firmness of his response stood in stark contrast to his usual measured scientific communication style and suggested something profound had occurred to make him draw such an absolute line. What made the statement even more notable was Travis's visible discomfort discussing the topic. According to people who watched the podcast video, Travis's demeanor changed completely when Skinwalker Ranch was mentioned. His body language became tense. He stopped making eye contact with the camera. His voice took on a flat quality, suggesting he was deliberately controlling his emotional response. And most tellingly, when the host pressed for details about why he was so adamant about never returning, Travis stated there were things he couldn't discuss publicly due to non-disclosure agreements, classified information restrictions, and personal reasons he wasn't comfortable sharing, but that anyone who had experienced what he experienced would make the same decision. This statement immediately sparked intense speculation in the paranormal investigation community about what Travis had endured that was severe enough to make a scientist known for his curiosity and willingness to investigate dangerous phenomena completely refuse to continue research at a location he had previously described as the most scientifically significant anomaly he had ever encountered. The podcast host, sensing there was a bigger story, attempted to probe further by asking if Travis's decision was related to health concerns, and Travis acknowledged that health was definitely a factor, but stated it was more complicated than just physical health issues. He mentioned that there were psychological aspects, family considerations, and knowledge he had gained about the ranch and what occurs there that fundamentally changed his perspective on whether continuing the investigation was worth the personal cost. In the days following the podcast, Travis's social media accounts were flooded with questions from fans and fellow researchers asking for more details about his decision, but Travis remained largely silent on the topic, offering only occasional brief responses that he had said everything he could say publicly, and that people would need to respect his privacy regarding personal health and family matters. What viewers of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch didn't see during the 5 seasons Travis appeared on the show was the full extent of medical emergencies and hospitalizations he experienced as a direct result of conducting experiments and investigations on the property. Incidents that were either not filmed, edited out of broadcast episodes, or mentioned only briefly without conveying the severity of what occurred. According to sources familiar with production and people close to Travis who have discussed his experiences, he required emergency medical treatment and hospitalization on 3 separate occasions during the 5 seasons of filming, each incident more severe than what was shown to viewers and each contributing to his ultimate decision that continuing the investigation posed unacceptable risks. The first hospitalization occurred during Season 2, following a high-energy electromagnetic pulse experiment conducted on the mesa where the team was attempting to stimulate response from the underground anomaly detected by ground-penetrating radar. Travis was operating equipment when he suddenly experienced what he later described as the worst headache of his life. Intense pressure inside his skull that felt like his head would explode, accompanied by uncontrollable nosebleeds and temporary vision disturbances including blind spots and inability to focus on objects. Emergency room physicians documented dangerously elevated intracranial pressure with measurements typically seen only in patients with brain tumors, severe head trauma, or acute infections. Comprehensive CT scans and MRI imaging found no tumors, no bleeding, and no structural abnormalities that would explain the sudden pressure spike, leaving medical professionals unable to provide explanation for the acute medical emergency. Blood work revealed Travis had been exposed to significant ionizing radiation during the experiment based on cellular damage markers and biomarker patterns, though investigators could not identify the radiation source or explain how exposure occurred at levels sufficient to cause acute symptoms. The episode that aired showed Travis experiencing a headache and needing to sit down, but didn't convey that he had been rushed to the emergency room or that doctors documented radiation exposure. The second hospitalization happened during Season 3 when the team was conducting drilling operations attempting to reach the underground metallic structure. Travis suddenly experienced severe vertigo described as the entire environment spinning violently, followed by uncontrollable vomiting and complete loss of consciousness that required team members to physically carry him off the mesa because he couldn't stand or walk. Hospital neurological examination and emergency brain MRI revealed temporary inflammation and swelling in specific brain regions associated with electromagnetic sensitivity and vestibular function controlling balance and spatial orientation. Neurologists documented that the inflammation pattern was consistent with exposure to extremely powerful electromagnetic fields, but couldn't identify environmental sources that would produce fields strong enough to cause this level of acute brain tissue response. Following Travis's third hospitalization during Season 4 and increasingly frequent episodes of unexplained medical symptoms occurring between filming periods, his personal physicians conducted comprehensive medical evaluations, including specialized testing protocols, specifically designed to detect radiation exposure effects and assess cumulative damage from repeated exposure to ionizing radiation across multiple years. The results of these evaluations were alarming enough that Travis's doctors explicitly advised him that continuing to work at Skinwalker Ranch posed serious long-term health risks that could not be mitigated through protective equipment or modified protocols. Blood work analysis revealed significantly depressed white blood cell counts indicating bone marrow suppression, a characteristic effect of radiation exposure that compromises the body's ability to produce blood cells and fight infections. Elevated liver enzymes suggested organ stress from processing radiation-damaged cellular material. Most concerning, specialized biomarker testing showed unusual concentrations of specific proteins and cellular damage indicators that medical literature associates with chronic radiation exposure rather than acute single exposure incidents. To investigate the white blood cell suppression further, Travis underwent bone marrow biopsy, an invasive and painful procedure where doctors extract bone marrow tissue for microscopic examination. The biopsy revealed cellular damage patterns that hematologists confirmed were consistent with ionizing radiation exposure, causing damage to stem cells responsible for blood cell production. What made this finding particularly alarming to Travis's medical team was that the damage appeared cumulative rather than acute, suggesting repeated exposure over extended time frames had created progressive deterioration of bone marrow function that would likely continue worsening with additional exposure, and that carried increased risks of serious hematological conditions including leukemia, immune system dysfunction, and potentially life-threatening complications. Additional specialized testing measured chromosomal damage in Travis's cells using techniques that detect radiation-induced breaks and aberrations in DNA structure at the molecular level. Results showed significantly elevated levels of chromosomal damage compared to normal population baselines, with damage patterns that radiation biologists confirmed were characteristic of exposure to mixed radiation fields, including both electromagnetic radiation and potentially particle radiation from unknown sources. This chromosomal damage is permanent and irreversible, representing genetic alterations that will remain in Travis's cells for the rest of his life and that carry increased cancer risk. Travis's physicians provided him with explicit medical advice documented in his medical records. Continuing to work in environments with elevated radiation levels posed serious long-term health risks, including substantially increased cancer probability, accelerated aging of multiple organ systems, potential permanent immune system compromise, and possibility of acute life-threatening events if he experienced another severe exposure incident. The doctors documented that Travis's cumulative radiation exposure across 5 seasons of Skinwalker Ranch investigation had already exceeded recommended lifetime occupational exposure limits for radiation workers in nuclear facilities, and that continuing exposure could push him into ranges associated with deterministic health effects that occur with certainty rather than probability once exposure thresholds are crossed. Behind the public-facing professional image of Dr. Travis Taylor as enthusiastic scientist pursuing groundbreaking investigation at Skinwalker Ranch, his immediate family was watching someone they loved deteriorate physically and psychologically under pressures they felt powerless to stop, leading to an ultimatum that would ultimately force Travis to choose between his career investigating the most scientifically anomalous location he had ever encountered and maintaining his marriage and relationship with his children. Travis's wife, whose identity he has protected by never naming publicly in interviews or on the show, witnessed her husband's transformation from healthy scientist excited about investigating genuine anomalies into someone experiencing chronic health problems, frequent medical emergencies, personality changes, and psychological effects that were affecting not just him but the entire family's well-being. She watched him lose significant weight despite eating normally, observed him experiencing chronic pain that required increasingly strong pain medication, noticed his hair thinning and skin developing unusual discoloration patterns consistent with radiation damage, and became alarmed when he began having nightmares so severe he would wake up screaming without memory of what he dreamed. His children, who had initially thought their father's work on a television show about mysterious phenomena was exciting and made him seem cool to their friends and classmates, began expressing concerns about why Daddy kept going to the hospital, why he looked tired and sick all the time, and why he seemed different and distant when he came home from filming trips to Utah. According to sources close to the family who have discussed the situation with paranormal investigation journalists, Travis's wife reached a breaking point during season 4, following his third hospitalization, when she realized the pattern was escalating rather than improving, and that each subsequent medical emergency seemed more severe than the previous one, suggesting the situation would continue deteriorating rather than stabilizing if Travis kept returning to the ranch. She gave Travis an ultimatum that forced him to confront the real costs of his continued involvement with Skinwalker Ranch investigation. The ultimatum was delivered in unambiguous terms according to people familiar with the conversation. Either quit the show and stop exposing yourself to whatever is causing these medical emergencies and personality changes, or accept that the family cannot continue living with the constant fear that the next phone call will be from hospital staff informing them you've had another medical crisis or worse, and that she would need to seriously reconsider whether the marriage could continue under these circumstances. She explained that the children were developing anxiety about him leaving for filming trips because they feared he wouldn't come back healthy or wouldn't come back at all, that she couldn't sleep during filming periods because she was terrified of receiving emergency calls, and that the psychological toll on the entire family of watching him deteriorate was unsustainable, regardless of how important he believed the scientific investigation to be or how significant the potential discoveries might be. During season 4 filming, Dr. Travis Taylor participated in a classified briefing with Department of Defense officials and Pentagon representatives who had maintained ongoing interest in Skinwalker Ranch phenomena since the 1990s, when the property was owned by Robert Bigelow and investigated under the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program. And what Travis learned during this briefing fundamentally changed his understanding of what he was investigating and the risks he was accepting by continuing the work. This classified briefing, which Travis has obliquely referenced in interviews without providing details due to non-disclosure agreements and security clearances he maintains through his defense contractor work, apparently provided him with historical context about government knowledge of the ranch that made him realize his health problems were not unique anomalies, but rather part of a documented pattern that officials had known about for decades. According to sources familiar with the briefing content who spoke on condition of anonymity, Pentagon officials shared classified data about health effects experienced by previous investigators who had worked at the ranch during the Bigelow ownership period under government contract in the late 1990s and early 2000s. This historical health data revealed that Travis's medical emergencies and radiation exposure were not unprecedented or unexplained mysteries, but rather consistent with a pattern affecting multiple investigators who had spent extended time conducting experiments at the ranch, particularly those who worked directly with high-energy equipment or in proximity to the mesa area where the underground anomaly has been detected. The classified files apparently contained medical records showing that several previous investigators had experienced similar symptom patterns, including unexplained radiation exposure, despite no identifiable sources, acute medical emergencies during experiments involving electromagnetic or radio frequency equipment, progressive health deterioration over time with accumulating radiation damage, and in at least one documented case, permanent health damage requiring the investigator to end their career in physics research and accept long-term disability status due to chronic illness resulting from ranch exposure. Most disturbing to Travis, according to sources, the briefing apparently revealed that government officials had known about these health risks for decades through their own research programs and medical monitoring of personnel, but had not warned current investigators working at the ranch about the documented pattern because doing so would require acknowledging classified information about previous government investigation of the property and would raise questions about why current investigation was being allowed to proceed if historical data showed serious health risks. The briefing also apparently provided Travis with technical data about the underground anomaly and associated phenomena that government analysts had collected in the 1990s, showing radiation emission patterns and electromagnetic field characteristics that explained why investigators working directly above the structure or in proximity during certain types of experiments experienced acute health effects. But this technical data remained classified and could not be shared publicly or used to implement better safety protocols without revealing the classified research. Beyond the documented physical health damage from radiation exposure, Travis Taylor has experienced psychological and cognitive effects that he attributes directly to his time investigating Skinwalker Ranch, effects that persist years after his last visit to the property, and that contribute significantly to his absolute refusal to return under any circumstances. According to Travis's comments in interviews where he has discussed his experiences generally without providing specific details, and according to people close to him who have observed the changes, he experienced what he describes as fundamental alterations to his consciousness and perception that occurred gradually across the 5 seasons of investigation and that cannot be reversed or undone. Travis has mentioned experiencing vivid recurring nightmares involving the ranch that occur multiple times per week, even years after last being on the property. These are not simple bad dreams, but intensely realistic experiences where he relives specific moments from investigations, experiences phenomena that terrified him during actual events, or encounters entities or presences that he believes are connected to whatever exists at the ranch. The nightmares are so disturbing and realistic that he often wakes up disoriented, unsure whether he is actually awake or still dreaming, and they have affected his sleep quality to the point where he experiences chronic sleep deprivation and has required medical intervention, including sleep medication. More concerning to Travis personally are what he describes as intrusive thoughts and mental phenomena that he doesn't recognize as originating from his own consciousness. He has stated in carefully worded terms that he sometimes experiences thoughts, urges, or mental content that feels foreign or externally imposed rather than naturally arising from his own mind, and that these intrusive thoughts sometimes involve the ranch, the investigations he conducted there, or knowledge about phenomena that he doesn't remember consciously learning. This description matches what psychiatrists and psychologists who study trauma and dissociative disorders would characterize as symptoms requiring professional mental health evaluation, though Travis has not publicly disclosed whether he has sought such evaluation or what any diagnoses might be. People who have worked with Travis on projects since he left Skinwalker Ranch have noticed changes in his personality and behavior that they attribute to whatever he experienced. Colleagues describe him as more withdrawn, less willing to discuss certain topics, displaying anxiety or discomfort when paranormal subjects are raised, and showing what appears to be hypervigilance or heightened startle responses inconsistent with his previous calm scientific demeanor. Several people who know Travis well have stated he seems like someone who has experienced severe trauma, exhibiting psychological patterns consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, including avoidance behaviors, emotional numbing in certain contexts, and difficulty discussing experiences that clearly affected him profoundly. Perhaps most disturbing, Travis has made carefully worded statements suggesting he believes something from Skinwalker Ranch may have attached to him or followed him from the property, creating ongoing effects that persist regardless of physical distance from Utah. One of the most frustrating aspects of Travis Taylor's refusal to return to Skinwalker Ranch is his repeated indication that he knows things about the property and phenomena occurring there that he cannot discuss publicly due to non-disclosure agreements with property owners, classified information restrictions related to his Defense Department work and security clearances, and personal safety concerns for himself and others. In various interviews since leaving the show, Travis has made tantalizing statements suggesting he understands far more about what is happening at Skinwalker Ranch than he has been able to reveal through the television program or public discussions. He has stated that evidence captured during 5 seasons of investigation, if properly analyzed and understood in full context with information he cannot share, would force mainstream science to reconsider fundamental assumptions about physics, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. He has said what he personally witnessed and experienced at the ranch convinced him beyond doubt that phenomena occurring there are real, measurable, and repeatable under certain conditions, but that the phenomena don't fit current scientific frameworks and would require entirely new theoretical models to explain. Most intriguingly, Travis has suggested some of the most significant discoveries made at Skinwalker Ranch have never been shown on television and may never be publicly disclosed because of implications they carry for national security, scientific paradigms, and potentially public safety. He has mentioned certain experiments conducted at the ranch produced results so unexpected and potentially dangerous that decisions were made to not broadcast full data or describe complete findings to viewers. When pressed for details, Travis consistently states he is legally prevented from saying more, that he has signed agreements restricting what he can disclose, and that violating those agreements could result in serious consequences, including legal liability and potential loss of security clearances necessary for his other professional work. Following his departure, Travis privately contacted other investigators interested in Skinwalker Ranch, warning them the location is fundamentally different from other sites, that phenomena are real and measurable, and that exposure carries documented health risks accumulating over time causing permanent damage. He warned specifically about high-energy electromagnetic experiments,